The Pacific Theater, World War II, 1944. The United States Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy engaging in fierce naval combat for supremacy over the seas surrounding the Pacific Islands and mainland Japan. The casualties of the combat, staggering, and included the souls lost aboard the submarine USS Albacore, which was lost at sea November 7th, 1944. Get this, earlier this month, the wreck site was finally identified after all this time. Here to share with us some more light on the subject, Stephen Katona and David Johnson. They are both independent researchers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so can you give me like a little bit of background on the USS Albacore?
Yes, the Albacore was launched in 1942, a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, and it conducted 11 war patrols. It was lost on its last war patrol when it struck a mine about 7 miles off the coast of Japan. It was one of the most highly decorated submarines of the U.S. fleet. Really? It sunk one Japanese aircraft carrier, 2 destroyers, and 1 light cruiser.
Wow. So this was big loss.
It was a big loss.
Okay. Yep. Who was Burton Paul Johnson?
Burton Paul Johnson he was born in New York, and his family moved to Clayton, Delaware. And he grew up in that area. He went to Smyrna High School, and at the age of 17, he enlisted in the Navy. He volunteered for submarine duty. He was initially assigned to a submarine as a relief crew. That submarine didn't make it back for him to join.
Yeah.
Then he boarded the Albacore for its 11th War Patrol. And he was on board when the Albacore was lost.
Goodness.
He was just 19, correct?
He was 19 years old. And he wrote the last letter home to his mother at Pearl Harbor, letting her know he was going on his first war patrol.
Really?
Yeah.
So how was the wreck discovered?
The wreck was discovered on 2 different expeditions that were led by a Japanese researcher. His name is Dr. Tamaki Yura, and he's associated with the University of Tokyo. And in the course of his work, he developed some new technology for remotely operated underwater vehicles. And he wanted to test that out by trying to find a submerged wreck.
Right.
He had, using publicly available information, he had kind of narrowed down a search area for the Albacore. And in May of last year, he went out initially and discovered a wreck on the bottom that he suspected was a U.S. submarine. The initial footage that he returned was not very good. The water conditions there are atrocious. There's a lot of suspended marine life and sediment and very strong currents. So he came back in October, early October of last year, with a better vehicle, heavier, much more capable, and got much better footage of it, which he then contacted through several different contacts, Steve and I.
Yeah.
And I was privileged enough to be able to see the raw footage that he had gathered from the wreck. And using that footage and comparing it to the last known photographs of the Albacore, we were able to make a positive identification.
Was there a giveaway that it was the Albacore?
There's several features on the wreck. There's features that were in general kind of unique to the Gato-class submarines of 1944, but there was one feature, a series of holes that were drilled along the upper edge of the superstructure that allowed the water and the air to vent out of that as the boat was diving.
Right.
And while those features are not exactly unique to the Albacore, they were unusual enough that not many boats got them, and Albacore was one of them. So I was able to see those images on the wreck footage, and we were able to send that information to the Naval History and Heritage Command, and they made the final confirmation that that was the wreck of the Albacore.
Okay, so U.S. sub, Japanese waters. What's the legal status?
Well, that is a little bit of a gray area. It's a sunken U.S. warship, and the U.S. Navy retains ownership of that warship. Okay. But it is sitting in Japanese territorial waters. So it is, it's a cooperative arrangement that the U.S. and the Japanese government have. It's been declared a war grave site, and is protected by U.S. law, but obviously the Japanese government has to cooperate with that, and they do. They have offered their full cooperation with that.
Awesome. So have you talked with Burton Johnson's family?
I volunteer for another group that helps the Navy maintain the contact list for the families. Burton was an only child. but he did have a stepbrother, and we located his stepbrother's son, which would be Burton's nephew. He lives in Louisiana, and he is part of the list that received the letter from the Navy on the discovery of the wreck. I can tell you I've spoken to several of the other family members, and they all are very appreciative of the closure that they receive. I just wanted to mention two cases. There were two children who were born several months after their father was lost on the Albacore.
Oh my.
Very sad stories there, and they were notified as well, and they got that sense of closure. Right. And in addition, there's one widow, a 100-year-old widow, whose husband was lost on the Albacore. And through her granddaughter, she told us she is awaiting the final news, which she got last week on the discovery.
Right. Stephen Katona, David Johnson, thank you so much for all the work you did on this, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. It was wonderful talking to you this afternoon. My goodness.